Hello, thank you for coming to the Anti-Spyware Coalition session. This may be the only semi-traditional panel at BlackHat this year, and we're going to do two of them. In the first half of the day, we are going to, the first panel, we're going to focus on kind of where is spyware today, what are people seeing out there, how are companies dealing with it, how's the enforcement going. And then in the second panel, we're going to focus on the future and what do people expect to see. We've got a great set of speakers today. Wish I could say I rounded them all up, but I didn't. Nico Sell did a lot of the work. I'm going to introduce them one by one. I'm not going to read their bios because you have them all in your book, from what I could tell. But they're not in the order that they're going to speak, so I'll introduce each one individually before they speak to let you know where to look in their bio. My name is Ari Schwartz. I am Deputy Director of the Center for Democracy and Technology. We lead the Anti-Spyware Coalition, let me give a quick introduction to the Center for Democracy and Technology for those that don't know us. We're a nonprofit advocacy organization based out of Washington, D.C. We focus on civil liberties issues, privacy, free expression, and trying to keep the internet open and decentralized. So there's actually a good 10-year history of our organization on this table for those that want to follow up on it, and some other paper from CDT and from ASC that I'll refer to in a little bit. So let me launch in a little bit just give a quick intro into where we stand today in spyware and what my organization is working on, and how the Anti-Spyware Coalition got here. Just quickly, how is spyware affecting people? What does it mean to people? 2/3 of IT administrators and security administrators say spyware is now the top network security threat, according to WatchGuard. 55% of enterprise computers have instances of spyware, according to Gerhard's company WebRoot, I think that Gerhard's going to be kind of showing some more statistics along those lines, going into more detail in the same area. And then 61% of consumers now have spyware on their computer. That's down from 80%, according to the National Cybersecurity Alliance in a study that they've been doing with AOL. They found 80% the year earlier, the December earlier, and this was this past December that they came up with the 61%. We attribute that drop directly to the increase in anti-spyware software on people's computers. The numbers have gone down since most spyware researchers have actually seen the number of threats continue to increase. So why do we care about spyware? Just to list a few of the issues: identity theft being high on the list for keystroke loggers and other kinds of threats that steal information, corporate espionage along those same lines. We've seen some criminal cases involving domestic violence where the batterers have placed keystroke loggers on people's computers, et cetera. Extortion cases, similar to the corporate espionage cases. And then general fraud, unfair and deceptive trade practices. I'm sure we'll hear a lot about what the FTC has been seeing in that area. And then general privacy and invasions and harm to users' computers. So we've focused on a few different areas in fighting spyware, and we're going to try and touch on some of these today. I think throughout the day we'll probably touch on almost all of them. Technology, being the anti-spyware tools, enforcement and forensics, meaning trying to find the bad guys and then enforce the existing law where it needs to be enforced. Advertisers and revenue models, since a lot of it seems to be based on advertising. Legislation, where do we need new laws, and polling and education. To help address some of the issues in the technology area, CDT helped to form the Anti-Spyware Coalition. And the Anti-Spyware Coalition came about, a lot of people know the history, but just to give people a little bit of a refresher course, a lot of the spyware companies and adware companies were threatening the anti-spyware companies with lawsuits, saying that they're calling them spyware, basically, and removing and for tortious interference, for interrupting their trade relationship with their customers, with what the spyware spyware companies were calling their customers people whose computers that they're on at that point.
Compromised is the word we're looking for.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm being a little slightly generous there. And the anti-spyware companies had a tough time with dealing with a lot of these complaints because a lot of them came out of the antivirus world where the people that write viruses don't usually show up and try and defend themselves to say, oh yeah, that was my virus that I set out there, and people want it on their computer. So they don't really have the background to go about doing that, and the standards were built in a different kind of a way, to be brief about it. And so they wanted to get together to form definitions. An earlier attempt to do exactly that had failed, mostly because the coalition was infiltrated by the same spyware groups that they were trying to combat in certain ways. So CDT was approached about trying to set up that kind of a coalition to work on that issue, work with the anti-spyware companies. We were interested in doing it if we could also work with researchers, academics, and public interest groups to try and really flesh out the issues and get at something that could really be considered a true standard. At first, the focus was on trying to get to a risk model. Oh, shoot. But then we decided that we needed more help in the definitions area because there was agreement on about 90% of the terms, but people were using the terms, it's about 10% of the terms to mean different things. So we felt as though we needed to get the definition out there, solve the definitional problem, and then move on. So, and I have the final version of the definition, final working version of the definition on that table as well that we came up with. We had a public comment process on it that a lot of people and some people in this room participated in. Basically, we have a general definition of spyware. I think most people in this room probably take the viewpoint that you know it when you see it. But in order to really build a standard out there that we could work from, we felt that we needed to go into more detail. And again, this information is on the table over there, and I want to get to the panelists as quickly as possible. So I'm going to skip through some of the more details, further details here. But the ASC then went through and also built a vendor dispute process so that there was an industry standard for handling complaints when they got them. For a risk model document, as I said, that was the main goal, to try and set up what behaviors, what observable behaviors spyware had. And then tips for consumers and enterprises. We have the tips for enterprises on the table as well over there. We've held 2 public workshops so far, one in Washington, D.C. that was very well attended, and the chairman of the FTC spoke, Eileen's main boss, spoke, and we've had one in Ottawa as well, and we're planning on having some next year as well. These are the members of the coalition, and if you're interested in getting more information about joining, et cetera, right now membership's limited to anti-spyware companies, people that distribute anti-spyware, academic institutions, and public interest groups. But if you fall into one of those categories or you just want more general information, please come and see me afterwards. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Gerhard so we have enough time to get into the details and get some questions.
All right, thank you, Ari. Wanted to add on a little bit onto what Ari was talking already in terms of numbers. I wanted to put some numbers behind the spyware problem. And, but first, before talking about numbers, we need to understand what's out there and how do we know what's out there. I think that's the fundamental question in the spyware space. With viruses, it's pretty easy. You stick out the sensor on the internet and you pretty much know what's going on there. Spyware is pretty hard to track down, and that's a pretty big challenge for the research industry, particularly as the research process, or part of the research process, is to actively hunt spyware. At the same time, spyware is changing its face pretty significantly every day, every hour, sometimes even every time you visit a website there. So trying to do this in a manual fashion was our initial approach to do so, but we quickly realized that doesn't scale. So we have put over the past 2 years some quite significant infrastructure in an automated facility, in a research facility, that allows us to crawl the internet on a daily basis, 24/7, specifically targeted for malware. So you can think of it as the Google for spyware. And what it allows us to do is obviously to understand where is the spyware threat, how it's changing in a nearly real-time fashion. And we take this data, we spider the internet, browse the internet, and keep this data in a big backend database where we store this information for research, for correlation, and for analysis, and particularly as well to create some of the numbers that I'm going to just walk you through in a minute there. In addition to what we do with this information is we publish our quarterly State of Spyware report. That's really much a reflection of what's going on the internet in terms of spyware. This report is actually coming out in about 2 weeks, so the numbers that I'm going to show you today are unpublished numbers, but going to be published in about 2 weeks as part of the Q2 State of Spyware report update. So let's take a look at the bigger picture here. If you think about it, look at this graph here. This is pretty much the development in terms of malware or spyware sites found by our research infrastructure. And when I talk about research infrastructure, I talk about this big data center infrastructure that sits on the internet in different places and emulates users fundamentally, browsing websites connected to a big backend database. So you see here, we do about roughly 4 million websites a week that we analyze for spyware particularly. And we don't just broadly apply our search engine or our spider, but we keep it very targeted towards areas we know there is spyware going on, spyware activity going on. So that way we can be pretty effective without rebuilding the complete Google data center. In this past quarter, second quarter, we have identified about 100,000 new sites that are distributing spyware or some kind of a malicious exploit behavior code. That brings up to a little bit over 500,000, 500,000 sites so far being found. So if you look at those numbers a little bit more detailed, you can then also look at where is the stuff coming from? Where is this pieces of malware, where is the spyware coming from? And it's pretty interesting actually, in this quarter, the US was by far the biggest contributor to the distribution, the overall spyware distribution. But let's not think that necessarily that all those sites that are distributing spyware actually know about it. So that's not necessarily reflective of the fact that the US, that the people who are behind those servers are necessarily sitting in the US. The people who are behind those servers could sit literally anywhere on the planet. That's part of the challenge with spyware as well, that you usually have different sites for distribution, and the people who are behind it are usually in different places there as well. Just as it happens, probably a big part of the internet is here in North America, and that's probably part of the reason why a lot of the spyware distribution sites also happen here in the US. You also see some sites in Europe, but pretty much the biggest part is clearly in the US here. Now, if you look at these numbers in terms of time over time, we also look at the other side of the medal. We not only look at who are the sources, but we'll also look at the targets. This is data from a target perspective, and basically is a reflection over the past 2.5 years in terms of how many pieces of Trojans or how many computers are infected out in the wild, end users' computers as well as enterprise computers, in terms of how many computers have Trojans on there. Trojans is by any means the smallest numbers of infections. If you look at the bigger spyware picture, including adware, and if you like to add cookies as well, the numbers are obviously much bigger. But I do believe it's important to keep in mind Trojans as being the most malicious forms of spyware, here being on the rising edge there. And those are examples of Trojans that we have published some of them. This is an example we found recently with our research infrastructure through an automated fashion. Very classical scenario, drive-by infection. So you go on a website and your browser is being taken advantage because of a security vulnerability that is not patched in your browser. Classical way of spyware is getting onto computers. The payload in this particular case